There are moments in life when the world stops laughing at you and starts listening instead. Sarah Mitchell experienced this exact moment in front of 200 people, a room full of experienced soldiers, and one Marine Corps officer who would change everything. What made this moment different from all the other times she had been doubted? It wasn't luck. It wasn't a sudden miracle. It was something far more powerful, the kind of transformation that only happens when someone decides that being underestimated is not an insult, but an opportunity. This is the real story of how a woman, dismissed as just another trainee, became known as the Iron Wolf. Sarah Mitchell had always been the kind of person who showed up early and stayed late. At 28 years old, she had already tried 3 different careers. She worked as a teacher for 2 years, then switched to nursing, and after that came her attempt at being a corporate manager. None of these paths felt right. She felt like she was playing a role instead of being herself. Every morning when she woke up, there was this empty feeling in her chest, like she was meant for something bigger, something more challenging, something that would actually test who she really was. Her family didn't understand why she kept jumping from one job to another. Her mother would call and ask, "Sarah, when are you going to settle down and pick a career?" Her father would suggest safer options, like staying in a comfortable job and building a stable life. But Sarah knew that stability without purpose was just a slow way of dying inside. She needed something real. She needed something that mattered. She needed to know that she was capable of more than she had ever proven. When Sarah first heard about the Marine Reserve Officer Training Program, something inside her shifted. She was 28, and most of the people in the program would be 22 or younger, fresh out of high school. She read the requirements 3 times to make sure she qualified. She studied the history of the Marines, learned about the training process, and spent 6 months getting her body ready. People around her thought she was joking at first. "You? In the Marines?" They would laugh. "Sarah, you have never been in the military before. You do not even like physical work." But Sarah had never been more serious about anything in her life. The first day of training arrived and Sarah walked into that room with 60 other recruits. She was the oldest and, more notably, she was one of only 4 women in a group of 61 people. The other women had military families, had grown up with the culture, had always known they wanted this path. Sarah was an outsider. She was a career hopper who suddenly thought she belonged among warriors. As she stood in line, she could feel the eyes of the male recruits looking her up and down, sizing her up, deciding within seconds that she didn't belong there. The training officers divided them into smaller groups for the initial assessments. Sarah was placed with 20 others, and their first task was a 10-mile forced march in full gear. Before they started, the training officer looked at the group and said, "This is easy stuff. If you cannot handle this, you should leave now." The other recruits looked confident. Sarah looked terrified, but not for the reason most people would think. She was not afraid of the physical challenge. She was afraid that her body, at 28, would not respond the way it used to. She was afraid that her judgment about herself was wrong, that she really was not meant for this. As they began the march, Sarah fell into the middle of the group. The first 2 miles were brutal. Her legs burned, her back ached from the weight of the gear, and her lungs screamed for air. But she kept moving. Around mile 4, a younger recruit who had been in front of her suddenly stopped. He was breathing hard, walking in circles, clearly hitting a wall. An older trainee, maybe 23 or 24, turned to him and said, "Come on, we are only halfway through." But the younger recruit shook his head and sat down on the side of the road. That was the first person to quit that day. Sarah passed him without looking. She did not have the energy to feel sorry for him. She did not have the energy to feel anything except the burning in her muscles and the rhythm of her breathing. The miles stretched on, and Sarah entered a strange state of mind. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell from Maryland, who could not decide on a career. She was just movement, just breath, just will. By mile 9, there were only 17 people left out of the 20 who had started. Sarah was still there. Her legs shook when she walked, but she was still there. When they finished, the training officer looked at the group and said, "Good. You made it. Now you have 5 minutes to rest, and then we do this again." Groans erupted from the group. Another recruit said, "Sir, twice in one day?" The training officer nodded. "This is Marines. We do not do things the easy way. You better decide right now if you are really here or if you are wasting my time and yours." "3 more people quit before the second march started." Sarah wanted to quit. She sat on the ground, her muscles screaming, and seriously thought about walking away. This was crazy. This was not worth it. She had a comfortable life before, and she could go back to it. She could find a nice job, settle down, marry someone normal, and stop trying to prove something to people who would never respect her anyway. But then something shifted inside her again. She realized that the voice telling her to quit was not the voice of her wise mind. It was the voice of doubt. It was the voice of fear. It was the voice of all those people who had laughed at her for thinking she could do this. She stood up, and she started walking again. The second march was harder in different ways. Her body was already tired, so every step required more mental strength. Around mile 3 of the second march, another woman from their group fell to her knees. She was crying and said she was done. Around mile 7, one of the male recruits, a tall guy who had been bragging about his athletic background, fell behind Sarah's pace. Sarah, despite her exhaustion, was still moving faster than he was. She did not say anything to him, did not offer encouragement, did not acknowledge him at all. She just kept going. When they finally finished the second march, Sarah collapsed onto the ground along with everyone else who had made it. Out of the original 20, only 13 remained. Sarah was one of them. As she lay there, breathing so hard she thought her heart might burst, the training officer walked over to her. He looked down at her with an expression that was not quite approval, but was definitely something different from dismissal. He said, "Mitchell, you got something. Most people with your background quit a long time ago. But you still here." He walked away before Sarah could respond. That night, in the barracks they shared with 15 other women from various training programs, the other recruits asked Sarah what made her stay. "I could not quit," she said simply. "Because once I quit, I would never be able to quit any harder thing in my life." One of the other women shook her head and said, "That is the most stupid thing I ever heard." But another woman, one of the few who had also made the marches, nodded like she understood exactly what Sarah meant. The weeks that followed were a mix of endless pain and gradual transformation. Sarah learned how to shoot, how to navigate using maps and compass, how to work with a team even when every person in that team was competing against everyone else. She got faster at obstacle courses, stronger with hand-to-hand combat training, and sharper with the tactical knowledge they were being forced to absorb. But more importantly, she learned something about herself that no other job had taught her. She was capable of doing things that terrified her, not because she was naturally gifted, but because she was stubborn enough to never stop trying. By the third week of training, Sarah had earned some respect from a few of the other recruits, but she was still very much the oddball. The older woman trainee who actually smiled sometimes, the late bloomer, the one who had no business being there. Most of the male recruits still did not take her seriously. They were polite enough, but there was always this underlying assumption that she was there by accident or because the program needed to meet diversity requirements. She was not here because she belonged. Then came the day when everything changed. They were informed that a visiting Marine, someone of high rank, someone with actual combat history, would be observing their training for the week. His name was Colonel Marcus Hayes, and his reputation preceded him. He was known as one of the hardest instructors in the entire Marine Corps, a man who had trained some of the best soldiers in military history. He was also known for being brutally honest about who belonged and who did not. When Colonel Hayes walked into the training room, the atmosphere changed immediately. Everyone stood straighter. Everyone looked more alert. Even the training officers seemed slightly more formal. He was tall, with the kind of physical presence that made the room smaller just by his being there. His eyes were hard, like they could see through people. Sarah felt her nervousness spike. She had been doing okay here, finding her place among the recruits, but this man would see right through her. This man would know that she was not really a Marine, not really warrior material. Colonel Hayes walked around the room, looking at each recruit. He did not say much, just looked. When he got to Sarah, he paused for a moment. He looked her up and down, and Sarah felt completely exposed. She was sure he would ask her why she was there, or worse, that he would laugh. Instead, he just moved on to the next person. Sarah's heart kept racing. Over the next few days, Colonel Hayes observed everything they did. He watched them run. He watched them train. He watched them fail and succeed. And then, on the 4th day of his visit, something unexpected happened. They were all in the cafeteria, eating lunch, when Colonel Hayes came in. Sarah was sitting with two other women from the program, talking quietly about the upcoming weapons training. Suddenly, the laughter in the room stopped. Everyone realized he was standing right there. "Mitchell," he said, and he was looking directly at Sarah. Her heart stopped. The other recruits turned to look at her. She could feel their eyes on her back, their curiosity about what was about to happen. "Stand up," Colonel Hayes said. Sarah stood, her legs shaky. The entire cafeteria was silent now. Everyone was watching. Everyone wanted to know what this legendary Marine officer was about to say to the oldest, most unlikely recruit in the program. Colonel Hayes stepped closer to her. He said something that no one expected. He said, "Tell me, Mitchell, why are you really here?" She could not give him the honest answer. That she was here because she was searching for something, that she did not know who she was without a purpose, that she needed to prove she was more than what people assumed. So instead, she gave him the official answer. "To become a Marine, sir." Then he said, "Most people here became Marines because they grew up wanting it. They watched movies or had family in the service."
You came here because you needed to be reforged. I can see that in the way you move.
"You are not fighting the training. You are fighting yourself. That is why you are still here." He paused, and then he said something that would echo in Sarah's mind for the rest of her life. "Iron Wolf, prepare." No one understood what he meant. Some thought he was giving her a code name. Others thought he was referencing something from military history. But Sarah understood. He was telling her that she had already begun to transform. It was telling her that underneath all her doubt and fear and uncertainty, there was something strong and unbreakable forming. He was telling her that she was becoming something new. The laughter that had filled the room when she walked in, the unspoken judgment and disbelief, it had completely stopped. And in that silence, Sarah Mitchell felt the first real moment of belonging in her entire life. She was not an outsider anymore. She was not just a woman trying to do a man's job. She was becoming an Iron Wolf. And there was no going back. Part 2. After that moment with Colonel Hayes, something shifted in how the other recruits treated Sarah. It was subtle at first, a nod of acknowledgement here, an inclusion in a tactical discussion there. But the change was real. The men who had previously dismissed her now seemed to be watching her more carefully, as if they were trying to understand how she had earned the attention of someone like Colonel Hayes. The other women in the program started opening up to her, in ways they had not before. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial leader among the female recruits, not because she had asked for it, but because she had proven through her actions that she could handle what they were being asked to do. The training became even more intense in the second month. They were now learning actual tactical operations. They studied maps of urban warfare scenarios. They learned how to work in teams of 4, moving through simulated combat zones. They practiced rappelling down buildings and conducting room-clearing drills. Every single day pushed Sarah's mind and body to new limits. But now, instead of pushing just to survive, she was pushing because she wanted to excel. In the tactical simulations, Sarah discovered something surprising about herself. While many of the larger, stronger recruits excelled at direct confrontation, Sarah was strategic. She did not charge forward. She thought about problems differently. In one particular drill, they were divided into 2 teams, one attacking a simulated compound, one defending it. Sarah was part of the defending team, and she suggested a strategy that involved leaving the front entrance mostly unguarded while positioning their team to defend the rear and side entrances, where the attackers would likely try to bypass the obvious approach. Her team leader, a man named Rodriguez who had initially been skeptical of her, dismissed the idea at first. But another recruit, Jessica, one of the other women in the program, supported Sarah's thinking. Together, they convinced the rest of the team to at least try it. When the simulation began, the attacking team rushed the front entrance exactly as expected, got slowed down by the minimal defenses, and then fell into the trap that Sarah had set at the back. Sarah's team won the simulation decisively. That was the moment Rodriguez fully accepted her as an equal. The physical training also became easier, not in absolute terms because the difficulty kept increasing, but easier relative to where Sarah was. Her body had adapted. Her muscles had grown stronger. Her lungs could handle the demands. But more importantly, her mind had learned to separate pain from danger. She could hurt and still function. She could be exhausted and still think clearly. She could be afraid and still move forward. These were skills that no amount of weight training or cardiovascular exercise could teach. These were the skills that made someone into a Marine. By the second month, Sarah had also begun to understand the culture of the Marines more deeply. It was not about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about never quitting, never making excuses, and always protecting the people to your left and right. It was about honor and duty, and the understanding that when you put on that uniform, you were part of something larger than yourself. Sarah had grown up in a world where most things were about individual achievement. Here, everything was about the collective. During this period, she also got closer to Jessica, the other woman who had supported her in the simulation. Jessica was from a military family. Her father and grandfather had both served in the Marines. But she had also experienced the same dismissal Sarah had. Their conversations late at night in the barracks became Sarah's favorite part of the program. Jessica would talk about the pressure she felt to live up to her family's legacy, and Sarah would talk about how she was still discovering who she was. They understood each other in a way that the male recruits simply could not. One evening, about 6 weeks into the program, Jessica asked Sarah a question that made her think deeply. Do you ever regret leaving your other jobs? Sarah did not answer immediately. She thought about the teaching job, about how she had loved helping students but had felt like she was just going through the motions. She thought about nursing, about how seeing people suffer without being able to truly help them had drained her emotionally. She thought about corporate management, about how she had felt like an imposter in an office where no one cared about anything except profit.
No, Sarah finally said.
I do not regret it at all. Those jobs taught me that I needed something different. They led me here. Without those experiences, I would never have found this. Jessica nodded like she understood, and then she said, My mother tells me that everyone has a thing they are supposed to do. Everyone has a purpose that is uniquely theirs. Maybe the Marines is that for you. That conversation stayed with Sarah. She began to see her earlier career attempts not as failures but as waypoints on a journey. Each job had taught her something. Each experience had built her toward this moment. She was not a late bloomer who had finally figured things out. She was someone who had been preparing for this role her entire life without knowing it. As they entered the third month of training, the program intensified in new ways. They began the Advanced Leadership course, which was designed to identify which recruits had the potential to become officers or advanced non-commissioned officers. Sarah entered this phase with a confidence much higher than it had been at the beginning. She had survived the physical challenges. She had earned the respect of her peers. She had proven that age was not a limiting factor. The Advanced Leadership course was different from the physical and tactical training. It was more cerebral. They studied military history, leadership theory, and ethics. They had to write essays analyzing historical military decisions and explaining what they would have done differently. They had to lead their teams in complex scenarios that involved moral dilemmas, not just tactical challenges. In one particular exercise, they were divided into teams and given a scenario. A military unit had taken control of a small town, and they discovered that the local population had information about enemy combatants, but the population was only willing to share this information if the military provided them with food and medical supplies. However, the military unit's resources were limited. They could provide supplies to this town, but doing so would mean they had fewer supplies for another town 10 miles away that they were also responsible for. The question was, what would you do? Sarah's team debated this intensely. Some members wanted to prioritize their official mission and allocate the supplies based on strict military logic. Others wanted to help the town that had the information because it directly served the war effort. Sarah listened to everyone, and then she proposed something different. She suggested they create a coalition with other military units in the area to pool resources. She suggested they reach out to humanitarian organizations to help fill the gap. She suggested they create a long-term solution instead of making a short-term choice between two bad options. The simulation facilitator overseeing her group said her approach was not practical for the time constraints of a real military operation. Sarah acknowledged that but said, "In a real operation, the choices are never as simple as we are making them here. We always have more options than we think we do. The best leaders are the ones who find the third option, the one that no one else thought of." Her team leader, who was being evaluated on his leadership performance, loved this approach. He adopted Sarah's suggestions for the rest of the scenario. When the exercise was debriefed, the facilitator specifically mentioned Sarah's strategic thinking to the entire group. He did not criticize her approach for being impractical. Instead, he praised it as an example of the kind of higher-level thinking that separated good military leaders from great ones. As the training program moved toward its final month, Sarah felt almost unrecognizable compared to the woman who had shown up that first day. She was stronger physically, yes, but that was the least of it. She was mentally tougher. She was more confident. She had proven to herself and to everyone around her that she belonged here. The doubts that had plagued her in those early days, the feeling that she did not have what it took, that she was foolish to try, that people were right to dismiss her, those voices had almost completely quieted. But there was still one moment that she needed to get through, one final test that mattered more than any of the physical challenges or tactical simulations. There was going to be a final comprehensive evaluation where the best recruits would be selected for intensive officer training. Sarah knew she had a chance, but she also knew that the competition was fierce. There were some incredibly talented people in this program, men and women who had every advantage and had trained since childhood to be here. 2 weeks before the final evaluation, Colonel Hayes returned to observe the program. One more time. This time, Sarah did not feel afraid when she saw him. Instead, she felt a kind of readiness. Whatever he said to her, whatever he observed, she knew that she had already made the transformation he had seen in her that day in the cafeteria. She was no longer someone who might become an Iron Wolf. She was someone who had already become one. The colonel spent time with each of the top recruits individually, asking them questions about their motivation, their understanding of leadership, their vision for their military career. When he got to Sarah, he asked her something that seemed simple but was surprisingly complex. "Mitchell, if you become an officer, what is the first thing you would change in how Marines are trained?" Sarah had not expected this question, but she answered honestly, "I would make sure that we teach new recruits that there is no single way to be a good Marine. I would celebrate different kinds of strength." I came here older than everyone else. I did not grow up wanting this. I came because I needed to be transformed, not because I already knew I belonged. If we only recruit people who have always known they wanted this, we miss out on the people who can bring new perspectives to the service. We miss out on the people who might be the best leaders because they had to work harder to get here. Colonel Hayes listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, he nodded slowly. Then he said, "That is the right answer. Not because it is what I wanted to hear, but because it shows you have actually learned something about leadership beyond tactics and strategy." He stood to leave, and then he paused at the door. He turned back to Sarah and said, "Iron Wolf, you have prepared well." That confirmation from him, in that final moment, was what Sarah needed. She walked into the final evaluation 2 weeks later knowing that she had already won, not because she would definitely be selected for officer training, though she hoped she would be, but because she had already proven to herself that she could do anything she set her mind to. The girl who had walked in not knowing who she was had become a woman who knew exactly who she was. She was Iron Wolf. Part 3. The final evaluation took place over the course of 1 week. 63 recruits had entered the program. 42 made it to this final phase. Sarah was among them. The evaluation consisted of a series of written exams, tactical simulations, physical tests, and individual interviews with senior officers. It was designed to be grueling and to identify who had the absolute strongest combination of physical ability, tactical knowledge, leadership potential, and mental resilience. Sarah approached each component of the evaluation with a calm confidence that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The written exams tested their knowledge of Marine history, military strategy, and leadership theory. Sarah had studied extensively, not just memorizing facts, but truly understanding the concepts. She scored well, but not at the very top of the group. She knew that some of the younger recruits, who had been in military academies before joining this program, had certain advantages in technical knowledge. That was okay. She was not trying to beat everyone at everything. She was trying to beat herself. The tactical simulations were where Sarah truly excelled. In a scenario involving a hostage rescue operation, she was selected to be the team leader. The simulation was complex. There were multiple variables, incomplete information, and unexpected complications that arose as the operation unfolded. She had to make quick decisions with incomplete information. She had to adjust her plans on the fly. She had to manage her team's morale and safety while pursuing the mission objective. What Sarah did differently from many of the other leaders was that she built in redundancy. She created backup plans. She did not assume that everything would go according to her strategy. When an unexpected complication arose, a simulated enemy patrol that was not supposed to be in their area of operation, instead of panicking or being forced to improvise with no plan, Sarah activated the backup strategy that she had already developed. The operation succeeded not because her original plan was perfect, but because she had learned from her mistakes and her experiences to build in the kind of flexibility that real combat required. The physical tests were, in some ways, the easiest part of the final evaluation for Sarah, simply because she had spent 6 months building her strength and endurance. Yes, there were recruits who were faster and could do more push-ups, but Sarah was consistent. She did not have any weak areas. She could run far. She could lift heavy. She could handle the complex obstacle courses. She was not the best at any single component, but she was excellent across the board. The individual interviews were perhaps the most important part, though. Sarah had to sit down with 3 senior officers, including 1 general, and explain why she deserved to be selected for advanced officer training. She had to talk about her vision for leadership. She had to explain what made her different from the other top candidates. And she had to do all of this while being completely honest and vulnerable. Why did you join the Marines at 28 years old, having never had any military experience or family connection to the service? The general asked her. This was the question that Sarah knew was coming. Everyone wanted to understand why she had taken such an unconventional path. Sarah took a moment before answering. She decided to give the true answer, the honest one, not the polished version. Sir, I was lost. I had skills and I was capable, but I did not know who I was or what I was meant to do. I tried several different careers and none of them felt right. I felt like I was acting a role instead of being myself. Then I read about this program and something inside me told me this was where I belonged. I did not know if I was right. I still was not sure when I arrived for training, but as I went through the program, I realized that the Marines was not just a job to me. It was a way to become who I was always meant to be. Every person here came for different reasons, but we all came because something inside us called us here. That calling is what drives us to be better every single day. The general leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, if you were selected for officer training and eventually become a Marine officer, what would you want your legacy to be? Sarah had thought about this question extensively. She answered, I want to be known as an officer who believed in people. I came into this program with many people doubting me, including myself. But I had one man, Colonel Hayes, who saw something in me before I saw it in myself. He did not make me soft or give me special treatment, but he made me believe that I belonged here. I want to do that for others. I want to be an officer who develops the people around me, who makes them believe in themselves, and who helps them become the strongest version of who they can be. If I can do that, then I will have contributed something meaningful to this organization. The officers exchanged glances, and Sarah could not read their expressions. She had no idea if her answers were what they wanted to hear, or if she had said something that would count against her. All she could do was walk out of that interview, knowing that she had been completely honest and completely herself. The results were announced 3 days later. 42 recruits had entered the final evaluation. 20 would be selected for advanced officer training. The announcement happened in the large assembly hall where they had started 6 months ago. All the recruits stood in formation as the commanding officer read the names of those selected. Sarah stood in her spot, her heart pounding, not knowing what would happen. She had made peace with whatever outcome came. She had already achieved more than she had imagined possible when she first arrived. But of course, she still hoped to be selected. Of course, she wanted this opportunity. The commanding officer worked through the alphabet. When he got to the M's, he paused slightly. Mitchell, he said. Sarah's heart stopped and then restarted at triple speed. She kept her expression neutral, maintaining military composure, but inside she was celebrating. When the names were finished being read, the 20 selected recruits were dismissed to report to the advanced training facility. Sarah walked out of that assembly hall in a daze. She could not quite believe it was real. She had made it. More than that, she had excelled. She was not just someone who survived the training. She was someone who had been identified as having the potential to lead. After the announcement, as Sarah was packing her gear, Jessica came to find her. They embraced. And Jessica said, I knew you would make it. From the very first day, I knew you were something special. Sarah asked if Jessica had also been selected, and Jessica said no, but she was okay with that. I found my answer, Jessica said. I learned that I do not want to be an officer. I want to be the best sergeant the Marine Corps has ever seen. And I am going to do that. For me, that is the right path. For you, it was always going to be officer training. I could see that in you. Sarah spent her last night in the basic training barracks in a reflective mood. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, uncertain, searching, trying to figure out who she was and what she was capable of. That woman had walked into this facility scared and doubting herself. But she had not quit. She had pushed through the pain, the doubt, the physical exhaustion, and in the process, she had become someone new. She had become the person she was always capable of being. The advanced officer training would be even more challenging than the basic training. Sarah knew that going in. There would be military science, advanced tactics, leadership training, and eventually an assignment to a real military unit. But she was ready for it now. She had tasted what it meant to truly push herself, and she had discovered that her capacity was far greater than she had ever imagined. 3 years later, Sarah was commissioned as a Marine Corps officer. She served with distinction, known among the Marines who worked under her as someone who truly cared about their development. She remembered every person who had doubted her, not with bitterness but with gratitude. Their doubts had made her stronger. She remembered Colonel Hayes, who had seen something in her before she saw it in herself. When she was assigned to a training facility, she made it her personal mission to identify recruits like her, older, unconventional, doubted, and to show them that they belonged. One day, about 5 years into her service, Sarah was leading a training program when a recruit who reminded her of her younger self asked her, "Mom, is it too late for me? I am older than everyone else here." Sarah looked at this recruit and she saw herself in those eyes. She saw the doubt, the fear, the desperate hope that she belonged. Sarah said to her, "You are not too late. In fact, you are exactly on time. You are here because something inside you called you here, and that calling is more important than your age or your background or what anyone else thinks. I came to this program as the oldest recruit. I was doubted. I was underestimated, and I became an officer because I refused to believe the doubt. You have something that the younger recruits do not have. You have the perspective that comes from living. Use that. Let that make you stronger. And remember that being underestimated is not a weakness. It is an opportunity to exceed every expectation." The recruit's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. Sarah knew in that moment that she had come full circle. She had completed the mission that she had not even known she was on when she first arrived at the training facility. She had become the leader that she needed when she was struggling. She had become Iron Wolf not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her and see that the old, the unconventional, the doubted, they belonged here too. Years passed and Sarah Mitchell's story became something of a legend within the Marine Corps. She was known as the officer who had risen from being a late-blooming recruit to become a leader of exceptional capability. Her story was told to inspire other recruits who were struggling with self-doubt. Young Marines who felt like they did not belong were shown her example and told, if Sarah Mitchell can make it, so can you. But what made Sarah's legacy truly meaningful was not just her rank or her accomplishments. It was the people she had developed. Marines who had served under her would often speak about how she had changed their lives, how she had made them believe in themselves in ways that no one else had. She had created a culture in her units where being different was not a liability but an asset. She had proven that the strongest teams were the ones that brought together the most diverse kinds of strength. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she completed her first basic training, Sarah would think back to that moment in the cafeteria when Colonel Hayes had said, "Iron Wolf, prepare." Those words had marked the moment when the world stopped laughing at her and started believing in her. But more importantly, they had marked the moment when Sarah stopped doubting herself and started believing in the power of her own determination. The woman who had walked into that basic training program 6 months earlier, uncertain and afraid and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, had become someone who knew exactly who she was. She was Iron Wolf. And her story would continue to inspire everyone who came after her, everyone who had ever felt like they did not belong, everyone who had ever been doubted, because Sarah had taught them all that the underestimated often become the unstoppable. The woman who had walked into that basic training program 6 months earlier, uncertain and afraid and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, had become someone who knew exactly who she was. She was Iron Wolf. And her story would continue to inspire everyone who came after her, everyone who had ever felt like they did not belong, everyone who had ever been doubted, because Sarah had taught them all that the underestimated often become the unstoppable.